Well,
What?
you lucky dog.
I know.
Did you get a bungalow?
Are you kidding?
You had to have been here yesterday for that one. Yeah, all the facts of a bungalow. All right, another question, yes.
This is for Mr. Drury. You were such a horseman, and you could tell when you were riding. I loved watching you ride, but did you ever have any dismounts?
Dismount.
Any fell off the horse during the shoot?
Not on purpose.
That was my question.
One memorable time I was sitting on horseback and Doug was there with me and so tired, you know, I mean tired, hadn't had any sleep in 7, 8 days. You know, it just wasn't any time to sleep. So I'm sitting there, it's a nice sunny day and so forth, and I just went to sleep and fell right off the hit the ground like a sack of cement. And I woke up, of course, and Doug said, well, Jim, I'd like to see you do that again. I fell right out of the saddle, hit the ground.
You know,
That can happen if you don't get it.
you mentioned John Daner, and I was just curious as to why you think that his character, I mean, he would seem perfect for the role, why his character didn't work out on there.
I have no idea. I liked what he did. I thought Morgan Starr was a terrific, dynamic character. He had great strength. He had enough moxie to argue with me all the time. Not often. I mean, in the scenes, we had the way it was written. He would come down hard on the Virginian, and the Virginian would come right back at him. You know, and I liked that. I thought that was great. It was a good relationship, and he was fired. You know, that's what happened to him. They fired him. I don't know. I didn't fire him. But somebody fired him. He was gone.
We didn't like him.
We didn't like him.
So you didn't like the character then?
It wasn't necessarily that. We didn't like the way he was with him.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I like the way it was.
I know you did. I mean, it all ended up good at the end, but yeah, we didn't like the way he treated you.
Well, I thought he would have gone. I thought he would have had a lot of longevity on the show. I thought he would last for many years. And then we got the Grangers.
And then the Grangers came in. Watched it a minute, man.
Awfully happy to have everything that happened on the show with the recasting and so forth. Doug and I, who were the only ones who went through the whole 9 years, were always terrifically happy until the final year. And when we got to the final year, we got a man named Stuart Granger. I won't say much more about him in this forum, but if you'd like to hear more about him, come and take me aside and I'll talk to you about it. Thank you very much.
He would enjoy telling you that.
I just wanted to mention that we had a couple of people come in late, so can we start over?
Had to do with Spanish Fly. You had to be.
Come on.
How many seasons did Clue Bueller do?
I think about 3 or 4 or 5 now.
So he was there after Roberta left, right?
No, he was there before, wasn't he?
He went
He did some shows.
Yeah, he did some shows. I don't think he was a
But he
regular.
did some shows where he played heavies and
Yeah.
villains and so forth. But I don't think he had the continuing character until after he
I
left.
think that's correct, yeah. He did a couple.
And then he was there for 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years, I don't know. I don't know what happened to him, he might have gotten fired.
He got fired. It's like women on
The great football coach, Bum Phillips,
Yes.
used to coach the Houston Oilers. He's retired now, but he's a friend of mine. We used to do a lot of rodeoing together. And he was talking one day and he says, there's 2 kinds of coaches. There's them that's fired and then that's going to be, them that's fired and then that's going to be fired.
We haven't mentioned John McIntyre.
Oh, John
I hated it. Took
So was
one
his
below.
wife.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He was so wonderful. You know, he and his wife were original members of the Mercury Theater, Orson Welles, and they were involved in the War of the Worlds radio show in 1939 when everybody thought the Martians had landed. And they were in that show. That's how far back their classical roots went. And they brought all of that, all of those experiences, and all of that stock experience, and all of that bus and truck travel experience to the Virginian. When they got there, they had all this background behind them, and they were magnificent.
And they were so humble, too.
Oh, yeah.
Just, you know,
They were magnificent.
the realest, nicest people.
Well, he was such an interesting actor because, you know, he had replaced Ward Bond on Wagon Train, and then he comes in, he replaced Charles Whitford.
Yeah, but Charlie died on the show.
Yeah.
He finished the show on Friday night and went home and died Sunday. He's passed away.
Oh, so they had to recast quickly then.
Yeah, well, Charlie was just, you know, he had pneumonia and we didn't know it. I don't know if he knew it or not, but he stayed and finished the show.
I think he did know it. He was as tough a guy as I've ever
He was
met in my
really
life.
tough.
Yeah, he was a tough guy.
Question, raise your hand, yes, sir.
Well, Don, this episode about that was labeled Stacy, was that before or after you threatened to quit or wanted to quit?
That was before.
That was before? So that was one of the scripts
Oh,
that you really didn't like?
No, that
Oh, okay.
The Stacy one was a good one.
Okay.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah. There were about 5 or 6 shows that were pretty good. And then the rest all, after they got their deal, like I said, with NBC.
Well, it's just like take $30,000 out of the budget. We're a hit.
Yeah, they get this huge hit. They get the whole really good, based on the fact that they get these good writing scripts that they've done, and then they help the writers away to try to save a little bit of money on this huge amount of money that they made. It was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard of.
I did like the idea that you stayed at the same time slot the whole 9
The whole
years. It
9 seasons,
never changed the time slot.
7:30 every Wednesday.
Well, I think that was NBC one.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying I'm glad that they didn't change it so you have a hard time trying to find it, you know.
Right.
It's a little bit of trivial history. Jeanette Nolan played the cook in the ranch house in the original half-hour Virginian that I did for Screen Gems that never sold to the networks. So she was involved in that whole show, and that was the first time I worked with her. I loved working with her. About a month later, I got another pilot to do for Andy Fennerty called The Yank. It was a spin-off of The Rebel, if you remember The Rebel. And I played a Union Army artillery officer who was a doctor. And he came to the South, as Lincoln said in the second inaugural, we must bind up the nation's wounds. And he came to the South because all the doctors from the South were dead. They'd all been killed in the war, or almost all of them had been killed. There were no doctors killed in the South. They'd all been tending to the wounded, and they got their head blown off, you know. So he came to the South, and it was called the Yank. And, you know, you can imagine what kind of a reception he got in the South at that point. Nobody liked him, and they threw rocks at him and so forth, but he prevailed. And it was a good show, and again, it was a half-hour show. It didn't sell to the networks. But John McIntyre played the only doctor left in that town in the South and was a mentor to the Yanks. So the history of the McIntyres goes with me clear through my whole career.
That is a wild story.
Wow.
I want to just briefly go back to Man from Shiloh. We don't have to mention Stuart Granger. I'll check with you in there about that. But, you know, not only did they bring him on, but they changed the name of the show and they changed your costumes.
Well, everybody thought that was a good idea. Get a new hat, new outfit, new gun, new horse, the whole thing. Get a whole brand new look at the show. People tuned in their television in the fall and wanted to look for the Virginian. It wasn't there anymore. They never heard of the Men from Shiloh, and we went off the air. It was a real easy to do that way.
Did it last the whole season?
Huh?
Did it last the whole season and go off the air?
It lasted a
The
whole
whole
season.
season.
Lee Majors was in it too.
Yeah, I think he did 3 or 4 shows. It was supposed to be 4 stars, and everybody did 6 shows, but it didn't work out that way. I did 12, and Doug did probably 8, and I don't know what those other guys did, but not much.
And Granger didn't do hardly anything.
Oh, well, he had 2 or 3 shows, but he went to Old Mexico to shoot him because he had a tax problem as a British subject, you know.
Ah.
So he couldn't stay in the country, he had to leave the country for a certain period of time in order to save himself in taxes. So they went down to Old Mexico. And we weren't involved in any of that.
Yes, right here and then back there.
Okay, yes, I would like to know from each of you. Mr. Drury mentioned his grandfather, but did you have someone particular in mind when you developed your character on the Virginian?
These other gentlemen you're talking about?
Yes, you had mentioned your grandfather, that you put a lot of him into your character. And I was just wondering from the others if they had anyone in mind when they developed their character for the Virginian.
Gary?
For me, it was, I kind of looked for Steve in me, because of, it's a lot easier to be who I am. I mean, it took me a while, and until I got into acting, I was afraid to be me. You know, I was, people are going to think I'm weird or wrong or whatever. But then when I became an actor and they gave me a part, I could be anything. So when I got the part of Steve, it was like, well, what about Steve is in here? And what is it about me that is Steve? So that's what I did. Just had fun with it. Simple. Roberta?
About the same for me too. My character was basically me. I mean, I was kind of the girl next door, which I think I kind of was, you know. So that's kind of, I've got the same character.
John?
They basically wrote the character for me. I mean, you know, since Frank and Charlie both wanted me, and they saw me playing this rebel with a kind of a good heart, but still just tough guy, you know, hot-head. They just kind of took that character, Joe Cherney character from Baby Place, and kind of adapted it over. They looked at some of the other stuff that I'd done, and I think that was it. So it was a kind of a natural. I mean, it just, you know.
Well, I'll tell you a story about that, which is kind of indicative of what we're all talking about. I did the Yank for Andy Kennedy, and Andy's a great Civil War historian. So I was cast in a picture called Hell to Pay, which was a digital production shot in Hollywood on 2 long